podcast land? It's your girl Nisha. Welcome back to another episode of Laughing and Crying. This is a podcast that values our relationships, including the ones we have with ourselves. That's important. It really is. I'm learning. If you're new, welcome. I guarantee you're going to have some fun. And on today's show, we're going to start out with let me tell you a story, and then we have a conversation on female rivalry. And you guys might be thinking, what does this have to do with relationships? Listen, it has a lot to do with relationships, especially if you're of the female gender, because we go through life and we deal with this topic. We never talk about it. It's like this undercurrent in our families and our jobs, and we're going to talk about it today. We're going to bring it to the surface. So, if you're guessing, wondering, hey, do you have somebody on the show today? I do. Amber, welcome to the show. I know you. I've gotten a chance to get to know you a little bit, but the audience is wondering who you are. Could you introduce yourself to us, please?
Yes, thank you, Nisha, for having me on your show. My name is Amber Tichenor, and yes, as Nisha said, I focus on female rivalry.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit? I know we're going to get kind of into your portfolio, but tell us a little bit something that we wouldn't hit on. Tell us a little bit something about Amber.
Oh, goodness. Let's see. Even though I speak about mean girls, I'm really nice and kind. I'm not a mean girl. Let's see. I love to travel, and obviously with COVID, I haven't really done any international travel lately, but I'm itching to go overseas and do some sort of travel.
Yeah, I also love to travel. What's the best place you've been?
Oh my gosh. My mom lived out of the country, so I've been to some pretty crazy places because of her. One of the coolest places was we went to Egypt and we rode camels in the desert, and that was pretty fantastic. And then one time we were in Thailand and we rode elephants in the jungle. So, I mean, there have been some pretty crazy trips.
Oh my gosh.
But they're fun. I mean, I'm like, wow. So
that's amazing. I got to get to Egypt. I'm going to get to
Egypt. My gosh. We're here and I love being in the US, but it's like you start to travel and you realize how big the world is and there's so much to see,
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, to podcast land, if you hear me sounding a little cray-cray, it's because I've been dealing with a cough and such. So just ignore all of my my voice issues here. We're gonna power through. We're gonna get through this. And we want to hear from Amber more anyway, so it's all good. Amber, though, but you have a story for us for our segment of Let Me Tell You a Story. What's your story about?
I do have a story. So I often get asked, why do I talk about female rivalry? Because it's such a niche. I never say that word right. So it's such a special topic. But then when you talk about it, everybody will nod their head and go, oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. So I had to study it. Well, I was working on my PhD, and I had to, for my dissertation, I had to pick a topic that impacted the work environment, and I knew I wanted it to be about women. So up until that time, I'd had little bits of rivalries, but nothing big. And so I was at a pretty well-known client, and I saw this happening in the work environment, and I'm like, OMG. Good women are walking, and this is a problem. And so I started writing about it, and then it really hit it for people. They were like, wow, this is real. Yeah. And so then I kept collecting stories, and I realized at that point that it's not just something that happens at work. It happens in our families, in our communities. It can be anywhere. And so years later, so I studied this topic extensively. Fast forward, we'd moved, new clients working, and I was with this woman I worked for, and it was awful. And she wouldn't really, I would say, I feel like we could communicate better. What can I do? I'd put it back on me, and she'd say, oh, there's no problem. But she would exclude me from meetings. It was awful. Like she yelled at me. She would take me off of emails. Like but I never really like got what was going on. I just thought, okay, it's time for a change. I need to get on a new project. But it was the 6 months of hell. It got so bad that I would wake up on Sunday and I would get the Sunday blues knowing that I had to go to work on Monday. And I was driving to work one Monday morning and I was talking to my mom, and my mom said, I hate, Amber, to see how you are doubting yourself, all because of this woman. And Nisha, I had one of those aha moments. I went, oh my God, I am in this, I'm in what I studied and I didn't see it.
Right.
So I was fired up. I like went in and I was a consultant, but I went in and I talked to my team and I said, I'm leaving. So I gave my 2 weeks notice, and my husband was like, most people don't just quit. Like they give it some time. And I'm like, I'd had it. But what really was so eye-opening for me is the fact that I did not see this behavior, even though I'd studied it so extensively and I was knee deep in it. It took kind of being away and out of it for it to really resonate that it had occurred. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is it doing to women who don't have the knowledge that I have? Like, that was my aha moment. And so that's how I came to start doing what I'm doing and sharing with women and trying to help people overcome this behavior. Because even my sister-in-law said, she goes, you're not yourself. What's going on? And I'm like, I snapped at her, and that's not me. I don't normally do that. But I realized, I think I felt like I knew everything about this topic. Going through it was the best, worst thing I could have experienced. Yeah. And so I think I needed to go through it to better understand what it's truly, truly like.
Yeah. And I think what you said about people don't really get it until you start to talk about it is so sobering, because I felt the same way. Like, I wanted to talk to you so bad because I thought this was like this new topic that I was going to learn so much about. But in reality, when you started to talk about it, I was like, I've experienced that, or I've gone through that. And it's not fun. And I think what's worse is that it's not talked about. We talk about how women are suppressed by the system and men and all that stuff, but we don't talk about how we do it to each other.
I know. And I think that was what was so eye-opening to me. It is not talked about. And so when I was studying this in the working environment, and I say good women are walking, they truly were, because there was fear around it. There's fear and there's shame. And so, plus they didn't know who to trust to talk to. And as a result, good women walk, but bad behavior is rewarded because the people instigating the behavior are staying. Yeah. So the culture is all messed up. And often, and I felt the same way, which you don't know why you don't talk about it, but if it is an ongoing behavior, I firmly believe it leads to a bullying type of behavior, but it squishes you down and you begin to lose your voice. And so everything kind of feels gray. And if it is, I'll give work as an example. If it's happening there, it's not just staying at work. It comes home with you. And so that's when my sister-in-law had said to me, you're not acting like yourself. And it wasn't until I was out of it and I could reflect that I could truly see it. And I think that's why it's often not talked about, because with this behavior, it's very intangible. It's sometimes so hard to put, because or, people might say, he said, she said, but it's sometimes hard to voice what's going on. And so as a result, you don't do anything about it.
Yeah, and it reminds me like microaggressions. Like, we talk about the Black community.
Yeah,
it's so hard to express what a lot of times we were experiencing is because there's these like little micro things that were happening. Yes, they add up. But when you take them out of the context, people are like, "Oh, well, why are you getting upset about that?" Or why are you? And it's like, well, you got to look at it as the
Well, as a whole. And then when somebody says, why are you getting upset about that? In a way, that could be kind of gaslighting, like minimizing how you feel. But you're right. It like feeds on itself. So there's layers of these behaviors. Yeah. And something you said, like in your introduction, like and we can dive into this, but it isn't just about the relationship with the other woman. So much too is about this is a
Yeah.
relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And one of the things that you said to me before, which is a term I never really heard, was the psychological safety
Yes.
that you studied. And I feel like it goes hand in hand with that relationship that we have with ourselves because like our psychological safety is kind of like in a way our job
Oh
to
my
keep that in
gosh.
check with
Yeah.
ourselves. We're in control
Yeah.
of that.
Yes.
Um,
And so often people talk about your physical safety.
yeah,
That's big. It's at work, it's at school, it's, which is huge.
yeah,
But the psychological safety is equally, if not more, important. And
yeah,
so I have recently really dove into study psychological safety and became accredited in um, giving assessments because I firmly believe that it goes hand in hand with the female rivalry, especially in the working environment. So if you feel that you can't be yourself, if you
yeah,
can't be vulnerable, if you can't say your truths, if you're afraid to speak up because you'll be reprimanded by somebody or told that's not a smart idea or whatever, um, that all impacts your psychological safety. You should be able to show up at work and 100% be yourself.
yeah,
And so, or anywhere, it's not just about work. And so, with that psychological safety, that when you don't have it, that's when these underlying uglier behaviors start to come out. And so that's the reaction to not having a psychologically safe environment. And you bring up a good point. It is so often I get asked, well, why do women act this way to each other?
yeah.
It's a perplexing
We
question.
all want to know.
We all want to know. And so there are so many reasons. And so when I say female rivalry, that's like the blanket word for all of the crazy behaviors. I had to come up with that. But bottom line, while every situation is different and why it occurs is different for every person, I fundamentally believe one of the core foundations of it is you have to like yourself. Women
Yeah.
who love themselves love other women, and so if
Wow,
you
that's
if
good.
if you have that, I call it your inner she bully, that little voice that sits on your shoulder and is
Yeah.
constantly talking to you, if if that is rearing her ugly head, or if she's always there talking you down and you don't think good about yourself, are you really going to find healthy, loving relationships with other women? No, you have to love yourself first. So you have to do the hard work. So I love in your intro when you talk about the relationships with ourselves. You have to love yourself to have healthy relationships. And do you have control over what somebody projects to you? Absolutely not. But you have
Yeah.
control in how you respond to that behavior.
Yeah, we're speaking my language, man.
I
Yeah.
knew I liked you.
Because that's literally on this journey of doing this podcast. What I've learned is like I started out being this like, how do we do relationships better? How do we do relationships better? How do we approach people differently? How do we look at people differently? How do we like forgive? And what I learned is like, well, the more you forgive yourself, the easier it is to forgive
Yes.
others. The more you love yourself,
Oh,
the more it is to love others. The more you heal yourself, the more
yes.
you are able to interact in relationships with other healed individuals.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when we're not healed, we attract and we're more comfortable around other
Yes.
broken people.
It's
And then
so
we
true.
wonder, why am I in this toxic relationship? Why am I in this toxic relationship? And it's like,
Yes,
it's so much coming back to us.
it
So I,
is. And I love that you bring up forgiveness because um, when I did my research study, I went into it with no expectations, but
yeah,
truly, I think I interviewed 9 women for my official study, and the 8 out of 9 women all talked about forgiveness. The ninth woman did not, and she was still stuck in that victim mentality, which I knew what had happened to her was horrible, but at some point you have to overcome, because and forgiveness doesn't mean you condone the behavior.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you have to bring in the other person to forgive them. It means
Right.
you're letting go.
Yeah.
And because if you can't forgive it, especially when I put on the female rivalry hat, essentially that means they still have control over you.
Yeah.
And so I was shocked about forgiveness. And there have been studies about forgiveness in the workplace. It's not just in your personal life. I mean, it's in your whole life. And so it's
Yeah.
such a huge, it offers you freedom if you can forgive and move on.
So true. It's so true. You're talking about psychological safety
Yeah.
in the workplace and why it's so important because people are afraid to speak up and um talk to me more about like what the culture because I know you brought up culture a little bit. Talk to me more about how all of this like affects the culture as a whole, and
Yeah.
how it's affecting even like the retention rate in companies and like all of that.
Well, there are studies out now about I forget the I'm totally spacing on the term about all the women leaving or the quiet quitters. That's
Oh,
it.
I've never heard that term.
The quiet quitting is going on now, and before that, it was the women leaving. And so work psychological safety is all about your culture. So it has to come from the top down, but it also has to come from the bottom up. Leadership
Mm,
has to be on board and they have to bring everybody on board. So you have to have transparent communication. You
yeah.
have to feel that you are seen, but also that you are heard.
Mm,
And so if you're collecting information about how to improve your corporate culture, if you're collecting it from people, then you have to act on it. Otherwise, it's backfires.
that's
So,
good.
but communication is key. And so then it's just having everybody be accepted for who they are. And so you have open dialogues, you're collaborating together.
Yeah.
There's trust, there's honesty. I mean, I can't say communication enough.
Yeah.
But then the next step is if you have people that are not on board with this vision of psychological safety and, the team dynamic, which studies do show that when this is implemented and you have this type of culture, you have less retention. People
Mm,
are happier and so they're willing to stay. But you also have to look at some hard things like if somebody is being a bully or, instigating female rivalry, what are the boundaries? Like, is it a one strike you're out, like, or is it zero strikes, you do it and you're gone? Like have a no tolerance type of policy.
yeah.
And then I also think this includes having bystander training. So then if people, and often with female rival you might not see it because it is behind the scenes,
Yeah.
but
So tricky.
any other type of ugly or bullying type of behavior, call them out and just say, hey, I see you. Because so often saying I see you will stop the behavior and you can do it. I could go, hey, Nisha, come on, girl. I know you didn't mean to make me feel that way.
Yeah.
Like I'm a big fan of humor. Like that can bring something to focus,
Yeah.
but it also can be done in a way where you're not stooping, down to the same behavior that they're initiating.
That's
But
it.
it's hard. And when something is directed at you, it's so hard to not react. But the psychological safety, it's so important. I could talk about it for hours because it's what I've studied. It comes from the function of the brain and how it's not you, it's your brain. So you better understand. We all like to think that people think the same as we do, that they have the same perceptions and outlooks. Oh, that's utterly false.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one, you and I might agree on things, but how we're going to come about it is vastly
Right.
different from each other. So the studies or the assessments I do, it just helps level set a team. So I know that, oh, you think about things this way. I think about things this way. How can we
Right.
come in the middle and be better together? So
Yeah.
it's, studies will show that teams will be more effective. They'll be more collaborative. And again, you'll have less retention, which is less money walking out your door.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you said it has to come from the top down when it has
Absolutely.
to come from the bottom up.
Yes.
Like everybody has to be on the same page about it because
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like when I hear stories about it and when I've experienced it, it's not necessarily the manager positions that are
Yes.
doing it. It's your
Yeah.
peers. It's your who you're like, shoulder to shoulder with that you're feeling it from. And so it's like there has to be education at that level and also, right?
And it can't be directed at you. It has to be a collaborative involvement from everybody. Because
Right.
if you force somebody along, they're going to just say, this is BS,
Yeah.
like, and you have to understand, then you have to understand if they're thinking they're forced, like, what have they gone through that makes them feel that way? So it
Yeah.
could be from speaking from a so-called kind of trauma, so it's it is the act of being vulnerable with each other, and that can be very hard, especially at work, because we're often taught that's weak, and
Yeah.
it's not. It's there's more strength in that. There's power in that.
Yeah. Especially
Yeah.
from a female perspective, right? Because we're all
Yeah.
trying to just prove that we're not weak and prove that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So true.
So funny. I talk about vulnerability on this podcast a lot, and I never thought about vulnerability and the workplace being
Yeah.
something that needed to marry each other.
Because I think it's not been like socially acceptable, because, I think COVID changed a lot of that, because, people were more vulnerable. You're working from home, you have kids in the background,
Yeah.
you have real life connected with family during COVID. And I think that has opened the door for, although psychological safety has been around for a long time, but I think now I hate the word buzzword, because I think it's deeper than that, but I think it is gaining popularity because there's truth in it, because everybody in the whole world was going through something. And then you look at how you're trying to continue to manage your life, continue to manage work, and there's complete overwhelm, and something's got to give. So you have to,
So there were a lot
and
of breakdowns on those Zoom calls.
exactly. And so it's not often pretty, but you also, I think we all realized, I'll give the pandemic again, we weren't going through it ourselves. Everybody was going through it.
Yes, like we were all going through it. And I think that is what's kind of got us on the same page. And so it's like now that the pandemic isn't looming so close like it was before, um, if you find yourself in this position, I guess I'll ask you because I know you know more than I do. Um, if there's somebody that's listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm in that right now. Like you're literally, giving me the words I didn't have.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So I have some short term and I have some long term, and sometimes it's asking some tough questions. And I'll give the work example, but this can also apply to your personal relationships. But sometimes, so the short term, like focus on the behavior that you can control, which is your own. You can't control anybody else's. If you are at work and you have somebody that's triggering you, try to be calm, control your breathing. I think taking a few deep breaths, and I can't stress enough, that does help. It's not just, something, it's not woo. Yeah, it does work. Document the behavior. At some point in time, once you start documenting, a pattern will evolve.
Right. That's huge.
Know your triggers. Like say a mantra. I am kind. I love what in the movie The Help, the lady says to the little girl, like, you is kind, you is smart, I love that. And so that's just like, that can help just set you back. You know what? I am all these things. And no matter what this person is doing to me, that's her belief, but that's not who I am.
Right.
And then plan something nice for yourself. So if you know that you have 8 hours to work with this human, like, when I go home, I'm going to go have a walk, or I'm going to go have a nice glass of wine, or, plan something that will change your mood. But that's short term when you're in the moment. Long term, there's a few others. Again, can't go back to document enough. That's truly, because this is so intangible. It's often very passive aggressive, and it's hard to put words around. Document the heck out of it. Because giving the work example again, if you're at work and you go to HR or leadership, they're going to want proof. Otherwise, it becomes a she said, and it's hard to put words around it. So recognize her intent. Is she truly being malicious, or is Maybe there are cultural barriers, maybe there are different ways you're approaching things and you're just totally miscommunicating, that may not be the case, but it could, if you feel comfortable, address her one-on-one. If you're in work, maybe say, hey, let's go have a coffee, like leave work and address it one-on-one, but also be very aware to have no expectations of what her response is going to be.
Yeah, that's good.
Because I did that and I addressed it one-on-one. And she said, oh, Amber, there's no problem at all. And I'm like, what planet is she living in? There is definitely a problem, but she didn't want to address it with me, I think, because I caught her off guard. And so that took the control from her. And later she went off on me after I think then she was in control, So just be aware personally, are you going to be upset if they don't agree with you or if they deny it? Just know your expectations going into it. Stand up for yourself. I think it's important to establish community and advocate inclusion. Implement education about this topic, because I think we all know it exists, but do we really know what it is? Share with others so you have support. Going back to maintaining to control and then practicing the pause. There's so much you can do.
Ooh, I like that.
Practice the pause, because then when we are reactive, we can be in the moment and heated. And so if you want to respond, just give it a break, and maybe you will respond, but then how and what you do, and even taking the time to reflect, is it worth my response? Because nothing I'm going to say is going to change her behavior.
Right.
It's just really it gives you reflection so you're not stooping to the same level of behavior. And then the last one is so hard, but it is that introspective looking inward. Do I need to leave the situation?
Yeah.
So if you're at work, if let's say this is escalated at work and it's addressed, is this truly the type of culture I want to stay in? Are they going to really change it, or is it going to be something that's ongoing? If it's personal, you might just need to set boundaries. If it's a so-called friend, just start slowly stepping back and looking at it. Is this serving me? And I don't go into a relationship with any friend or any other person who's special to me thinking, what are they giving me and what am I giving them? You don't normally do that. But I think there's also the point that it is reciprocal. Sometimes you may need more in a relationship. Sometimes I may need more, but always that they're there for you through thick and thin and unconditionally. And if you don't feel you're getting that, why are you still friends with this person?
Right.
If you think that if everybody's sitting at a table and you're gone and she doesn't have your back, why are you staying there? Why are you walking on eggshells? So
I love that. I mean, first of all, you said so many great things. Oh
I gave you a big dump right there. Yes.
Right. I feel like I could have a podcast about each one. But what you just said about like that, why are you still friends with that person? I think goes back to that introspection that we were talking about, and loving yourself.
Yes.
Because like you said, we don't walk around counting, or hopefully tallying, I did this, you did that. Hopefully we're not doing that, keeping score, but there is a sense where you feel, wow, I'm giving so much more in this relationship, or I'm being so much more kind in this relationship. And there has to be something that clicks inside of me that says, hey, what am I saying about my worth when I stay? Well, and I've had conversations about female rivalry, but I'm like, this is spanning the limits of so many other relationships.
Because it feeds in. And then I think I've had so many, I'll say, but why are you still friends with this person?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, because we have a history. We met in college. I'm like, yeah, but we talk about our partner relationships all the time. Breakups, divorces, whatever. You rarely ever hear about friendship breakups. And it's a thing too. I mean, relationships of all kind ebb and flow,
Yeah.
and the same thing, like, or other moms will say, well, we met when our kids were in preschool and, now the kids are in high school. So, a lot of things have changed since then. But, or, if sometimes you are in a relationship for that moment in time, sometimes you have relationships that last a lifespan, like you don't always know who that person will be to you. It's hard to let go, but if they're talking about you, if you're walking on eggshells, if they are unkind, like you really, this is that thinking hard. And as you so greatly mentioned, your own self-worth. You deserve people that have your back as much as you have theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially being in that vulnerable bubble that we,
Yes.
walk around with.
Yes.
Like you're letting people in that are affecting you in ways that you're not
Yeah.
acknowledging. And then we turn around in therapy. I'm one of those people. I'm not talking about people. I'm
Yeah.
one of those people that turn around in
Yeah.
therapy and say, I don't know why I feel this way about myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
They're like, who's around you? Who are you letting in your
Yeah.
space? And I feel like what
I'm
we're talking about is what culture nicknames like protecting your energy.
yes.
Um,
Yes. And
and sometimes
boundaries.
I think
Yep.
that's a little, but you know,
Yeah.
and the way that we're discussing it today, I'm like, no, that's real. Like,
Well, it is a little woo, but it is also, if you don't want the woo part of it protecting your energy, then have it just stay, put a boundary out there. I don't have to tell you, Nisha, I'm setting a boundary with our
yeah,
friendship because that would probably backfire.
right,
But if you slowly just disengage, and then you know what, at some point you can re-engage later if you want to,
yeah,
and you'll just see where it goes, but maybe put the onus back on her for a bit to see
right,
if she picks it up and continues the way that you want it to.
right. Yeah. I'm just thinking back over all the things that I've just been learning and been practicing, and boundaries, man,
It's
so
hard.
huge. It is hard. Oh my gosh, it's hard. And I'm sure I personally work um solo in my
Yeah.
job, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it's even harder to put those boundaries in place in your workplace.
I think so too, especially if you're working closely with somebody.
Yeah,
But again, I think that goes back to the psychological safety. And it's not just, I gave my story that I went in and quit. I know that is just not so easy to do.
yeah,
So, but one thing I always tell everybody, and whomever's listening, just keep your resume up to date because
yeah.
that is a full-time job in itself. So if you
Oh
can
yeah,
keep that up to date so it's ready, but looking for a job is a full-time job. And so you're right. Like, but when it happens at work too, that's your livelihood. That's how you make your money. That's how, your promotional track. So if you have somebody you're dealing with that is inhibiting that, that's a big red flag.
yeah,
Like, but there's fear involved. And because then you kind of feel stuck. So keep your resume up to date and be your own best advocate because work is great, but they're not always going to be your advocate. You have to be your own advocate.
yeah. And I also love what you said about like not having expectations um, when you have those conversations, because there are
Yeah.
people who are working on themselves to be healthier forms of
Yeah.
themselves, who can receive certain types of conversation and certain
Yeah.
types of um, just accountability. And then
Yeah.
there's other people who can't.
At all.
Yeah. And you don't know who is
Yeah.
who.
No. And again, too, going back to what I'd said about how it's not you, it's your brain. My perception and how I think you should react may be very different than how you think you should
Yeah.
react, unless you know them so well and you're like, I know she's going to react
Right.
this way, but you can't. And I think not having expectations then reduces that feeling of disappointment,
Yeah.
because you think I'm going into this to try and make it better. And then she doesn't respond. She doesn't do anything. And then, oh, I'm back to square one. And then you feel
Right.
deflated. So if you just know, if you're having the conversation, you have it for you. You
Yeah.
don't have it for the other person.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
It's hard.
Yeah. And even what you were saying about there being cultural differences.
Oh,
Like sometimes it is malicious, sometimes it's
Yeah.
cultural differences that maybe, especially like even you're just talking about like northern states and southern
Huge.
state, yeah, like southern states, they do kind of are kind of groomed to not be so upfront and not be, it's like bless
Yeah.
your heart,
Yes.
it's
Yes,
like very much
exactly.
so that. And northern, like,
More
I've lived
direct.
both places. They're very
Yeah.
direct. They'll say
Hmm.
something that you're like, "Whoo, that was off-putting," but it's
Yeah.
just the culture. It's just
It's their
we,
style.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just say
Well,
it.
and even and cultural, like, what if it is a completely different culture, but
Yeah.
also too, like, maybe this person is shy and she comes off as aloof.
Ooh,
Maybe she is into, maybe she's likes to be alone more than she does with a group.
yeah,
Like you don't want to assume there's always malicious intent.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there are women that are just
Oh
not
yeah.
nice.
Oh yeah.
But if
Oh
you
yeah.
if you approach it with the openness of, okay, what could be going on, really understanding, recognizing her intent, maybe she's not mean, maybe it's a cultural thing. Um,
That's
but
what I love about your approach to the conversation is that there's this like openness and there's this conversation that you're promoting to have
yeah,
because you could find so much out by just having a
talking.
conversation with someone.
Yeah, and it's hard not to get defensive or put
Yeah.
them on the offense. And if you bring it up in a way, some people don't like I remember when I had the conversation, I put it back on me. What can I do to improve our communication? We both have the same goal. We're working on these same projects. We're here for the same intent. I had one gal tell me, she goes, "Well, I would never do that. If I didn't do anything wrong, I wouldn't." And I like she got, and I
Yeah.
get that because it kind of, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I knew I wasn't, but I knew we were not communicating.
Yeah.
But I also knew that if I would have presented it in other ways, it would have made her totally feel defensive.
Yeah. And I think that's so hard. I've had a hard time adjusting to not only how do I receive things, but how do I share things in a way that doesn't put someone on the defense.
Yes, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why practicing the pause works, because
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, if is what I'm going to say really help or not? And if you think about it, if you really think that they're so in their own zone and not open to what you have to say, then
Yeah.
why waste your breath?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's just when you're talking about culture, I just keep thinking about women in the Black community. And it just feels like there's so much rivalry. And I don't know why. I don't know
Yes.
if it goes back culturally to kind of our history and
Yeah.
the very oppressive nature of the
Yeah.
history. And
Yeah.
if that plays into it a lot, or is it because we're just kind of oppressed in a different way? And so we're always trying
Yeah.
to be like, there's only going to be one of us that make it. So we got to kind of, step
Yes.
on the head of the other. I'm not really sure. Have you had any experience in your research talking about cultures in that way?
Okay, you bring up something that I just am so intrigued with. So I have
Okay.
it got put on the wayside, but I did, because I think it's fascinating that while there's this rivalry amongst women as a whole,
Right.
I'm finding within cultures there's sub rivalries. And so I
Oh,
did
yeah.
a survey. My goal was to do a survey with different cultures, but my first survey was with Black women, and it was some, I didn't get a huge response, but I will go at it again. But it was like the rivalries with the lightness or darkness of your skin
Yeah.
or your hair
Oh,
or
yeah.
how you grew up. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was eye opening to me. And
Yeah.
then I wanted to do the Latina culture, and also even I've spoken to a woman, the Middle Eastern culture, because you have so many, it's not just one, if there are many subcultures in the Middle Eastern women
Yeah.
culture. So that is on at some point. It's just, that's a lot of time to do, but it's eye opening, and it's sad too. Like, you want to, I don't know what the root cause of it is or why it exists in subcultures in a culture, but it definitely is there.
Yeah. I would love to hear more about, because I'm living it, right? Like you said, like
Yeah.
sometimes when you're in the box, it's hard to like take that step back.
Yes.
Um, but I'm living it. But I would just love to know like why I'm living it. Like
Yeah.
where does it come from? Because
Yeah. So
um
often with in this female rivalry as a whole, so I think it first and foremost is not feeling good about yourself. So it's my definition is a female rivalry is one woman minimizing another woman so they both feel small.
yeah,
And it hurts organizations and teams and people and whatever. And people will often say, why does it make both women feel small? I
yeah,
understand how the one woman feels small who's on the receiving end, but
right.
the other woman, I said, well, think about it. You have to feel small within yourself if you're able to project that behavior onto
Yeah.
somebody else. So
So,
that's one of the foundational pieces. But then it could be how you were raised. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your mother was always comparing you to your sister or your
yeah,
cousins. I have one woman I interviewed, and it's in my book actually, but she was from a Latina culture. And she said, you have the fiery Latina women. And she's like, she was always arguing with her sisters, but then that carried down to the kids and the female cousins. And she said it was toxic. Then maybe you grew up in a household where you were told you were never good enough.
yeah,
So you're always trying to better yourself.
yeah,
Maybe you want to be at the top and there's no one has helped you. So why should you help anybody else?
yeah,
Maybe it's the need for control. Maybe it's pure jealousy. I want what you have. Like, why should you get it? I should get it. There's so many different reasons. Every
man,
situation is
yeah,
so not the same. But in my mind, like, I think it's the scarcity or the abundance mindset. And
yeah,
or the victim,
right. That's
that victim mentality is
yeah,
huge. And I am of the abundance. So let's say you're a coach and I'm a coach, my mindset is, why don't we share information and work together? It doesn't mean we're doing the same work, but because how you're going to come about your business is be vastly different than how I
right,
would come across mine. But let's say my calendar's full and or let's say I meet somebody and I'm like, wow, this gal is great, or whomever this person is, but I know I'm probably not the best fit. I just feel it's not a good fit, but
right,
Nisha would be awesome. So
right,
that's that abundance mindset. I'm a believer if you share more things come back full circle.
right.
And so it's again, that takes the victim and the scarcity out of it because you're happy sharing, you're happy to see you win. And
Yeah,
then you're happy for me too. So
right.
it becomes twofold. And you're not doing it to get something out of it. You're doing it because it feels good, but it's also, what's it hurting?
Yeah. Like seriously though, like when we like band together, it's like we truly could get more done.
Oh
And
my gosh.
and there's enough clients and there's enough work out
Yes.
there for everyone.
That's, but some people firmly don't see that way. That's that
Yeah.
scarcity victim mindset. And that's when you have to ask the hard questions. Like, it's hard to look inward, but you have to do that work.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think you kind of just answered this question, but the another question that I had for you was for the people who are listening who are saying like, yeah, but I do want to be the best. I do want to
Yeah.
whatever. Like, what's like a healthy level of female
Yes.
opposition
Yeah.
without it getting to get into that toxic rivalry? But I think you brought up
Yeah.
a good point of like working together,
Yeah.
having the competition be with yourself and not
Oh,
be with
huge.
the person across
Yes.
you, you know?
Well, and I think some women I've interviewed too, they'll say, I'm always been so competitive with myself.
Yeah.
But that is off-putting to other women who aren't secure in their own skin. You have to be happy in your own skin. The other thing is bring on the competition. I think positive competition is a wonderful thing. It lifts you up, and we'll talk about teams, but it can improve you all to be better. You're competing for the cause together. It's when
Right.
it flips and you get the jealousy, you get the envy, you get the greed, whatever it is that's driving it to be negative, that's when it becomes destructive. But positive competition is huge. I think we all need it. I think
Yeah.
there's wonderful outcomes from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said that because, and I think it's important to make that distinction because I don't think it all fits into one box. Like if you want the promotion over someone else, or if you
Yeah.
want to apply for I don't think that that's bad. But I think
No.
when you feel like you have to make someone else feel small
If
in
you
order
have
for
to
you,
cut somebody down to get you
yeah,
to get ahead, that's where there's a problem.
yeah,
If you're going to get that promotion or if you're going to rise, you are doing it because you deserve it and your ability is showing that you're the
yeah,
right person. And there's a lot of, there's competition in everything we do, but
right,
I think it comes down to ethics and doing what you know is nice and right and kind. You do your best. And if there's somebody else that might be doing it better, then that wasn't your opportunity. Then there's something else better that will come along. I believe that, but sometimes that's a hard pill for some people to
yeah.
swallow.
It is, it is, and I just love what you said about hey, sometimes you have to going back to introspection. Like if somebody is getting promotion, if somebody is, whatever they're doing, like you have to check your own envy and jealousy.
Yes. And that's
Um,
normal. Don't get me wrong. Like if I didn't get my promotion that I was going after, I would feel sad
yeah,
and I would be jealous. I'll be honest. But then there's the healthy amount like, okay, but it's time to move on. That wasn't meant for me. It's not like I'm going to go slash all her tires,
yeah,
like
right, right, right.
like there's the normal healthy. It's when it gets out of bounds that's when it's, but yeah, you're going to feel your emotions and you have to embrace those. But I think it's when they come, it's calling out what that emotion is.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm feeling envy. Why am I feeling envy? Because of this, this, and this. Well, I'm feeling mad. Why am I feeling this, this? And then when you recognize it, that can help you deal with what it is, and then
right,
you can move forward.
right. I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh, Amber, this conversation is so fascinating. I feel like I could talk with you for so many more hours, but I'm sure people will be like, why are you still talking about this? Uh, uh, but you have a book. Tell us
I
about your book.
I do have a book. Thank you. It is called Behind Frenemy Lines: Rising Above Female Rivalry to Be Unstoppable Together.
That's awesome.
And so it has a lot of stories. It's kind of a little workbook in it as well that you can
Cool.
ask. I ask questions and um, you can reflect. But yes, and then it talks about what it is, how it makes you feel, and then at the end, how to overcome it to be better together.
That's so amazing.
Thank you.
Also, tell us where can we get the book and where can we find you in general on the social streets?
Yes, so the book is on Amazon. It should be at Barnes and Nobles, your major booksellers. It's also on Audible, and
Oh, nice.
it's digital or a hard copy. And then I'm just right now switching my website. It's Dr. Amber Tichenor, PhD. So that is my website, and
Okay.
then my social media handles are the same thing. That's Tichenor, Tichenor.
Okay.
But yes, if you and I will give you all the updated information,
Oh yeah,
Nisha.
and I'll throw it in the description box of the episode so you guys don't have to like find it.
Yeah, but feel free to reach out. I know this is an awful feeling when you're going through this, and but it's real. And I think so often when I've talked to women about this, the one thing that always comes out is they feel alone. They thought they were the only one, and it's because, as you mentioned, we don't talk about this. So no, ladies, you are not the only one. This is real, and it doesn't feel good, but I think the more we talk about it, the more we can overcome it.
Yeah. That's so good. Amber, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking with us about this topic because I literally, guys, I'm about like would never have thought to be like, I need to talk about female rivalry.
No.
But we needed to talk about it.
Yes, we need to talk about it.
Yes, for sure.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. I've loved chatting with you, and I've loved getting to know you.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Yay.
Podcast land, I hope you love Amber. Go check out her book, go check out her social, and make some friends, guys. Let's network up,
Yes.
you know? Relationships are tricky, but I hope you had something to take away from the conversation that we had today. I hope you laughed a lot. I hope you cried if you needed to. And make no mistake, I would love to hear what you loved most about this podcast episode. And if there's a topic that you're like, Niche, you got to talk about this next, I want to hear it. Hit me up on Instagram where I'm most active at Unleashthaneesh. I'm sorry, guys. This is cold, man. And you can also find me on any other platform, also at Unleashthaneesh. That's Unleash, THA, niche with 2 E's. If you think more people should listen to the show, you can help me get the podcast noticed by sending an episode to a friend, by writing a review on Apple Podcasts, and by continuing to share on social media. And if you want to go deeper to the topics, laugh harder, join me over on Patreon. Patreon is a platform for digital creators where you can pay a small fee and get access to more of their content. And so if you want the podcast early, the video version of the podcast, personal vlogs, much more, go over on patreon.com/unleashthaneesh. You don't want to miss out on that opportunity. And I think that's it. I loved hanging out with you today.
Yeah.
This
Loved it.
We got to do another one.
Yes, I love it.
Yes. And, maybe we can impact the world or something.
Exactly.
You're right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.